The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Representative Jasmine Crockett was led in, wrists shackled in silver cuffs. It was a shocking sight, not just for the image itself, but for what it represented. Sitting Congresswoman detained for contempt. During a protest demanding justice for incarcerated women denied medical care. Her back was straight, her face calm, but her eyes, those eyes burned with purpose. Cameras flashed, but Jasmine didn't flinch. She wasn't there to be shamed. She was there to make sure the system that brought her in like a criminal would have to answer to its own crimes. Just 5 minutes earlier, she had been at the courthouse steps, speaking truth to power through a bullhorn. Her words pierced the morning air as she cited case after case of abuse within the state's for-profit prison network. When police moved in to declare the protest unlawful, she stood her ground. "If justice is unwelcome here, then so am I," she said, raising her hands as officers approached. The cuffs clicked around her wrists, but the crowd erupted not in fear, but in applause. Crockett had become a symbol, not just a voice. And once inside, she made that perfectly clear. Inside the courtroom, the judge looked uncomfortable. Knew who she was. The media knew. The public knew. But the system expected silence, not strategy. That was their first mistake. As the prosecution accused her of obstruction and incitement, Jasmine stood up. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "I am more than willing to face whatever consequences you deem appropriate. But I ask the court to first consider the actions. I was arrested for advocating for the rights of women being denied life-saving care while in custody." The room was still. Even the stenographer stopped typing momentarily. She was granted permission to speak. What followed wasn't just a defense, it was a dismantling. Jasmine cited constitutional precedents, quoted legislative records, named prison corporations by contract, and read testimonies from victims who'd been silenced. She read from one letter written by a woman whose untreated infection resulted in permanent infertility. And yet, Jasmine said, holding the letter high, my demand for her to be heard was what the system deemed criminal. The courtroom was silent. Save for the sound of justice roaring through her voice, the judge cleared his throat, visibly shaken. "Congresswoman Crockett, your passion is evident," but she cut in, respectfully but firmly. "This isn't about passion, Your Honor. This is about principle, about the laws that get enforced selectively, about the voices that don't carry unless they're amplified through a microphone or, apparently, through handcuffs." Her tone was even, her eyes unwavering. And for once, no one in power could interrupt her. She was commanding the floor not through force, but through fact. As news spread, the media narrative began to shift. What was initially labeled unruly behavior became a peaceful protest for prison reform. Activists rallied outside, projecting her words onto city walls. Meanwhile, Crockett, still cuffed, continued to speak. "If I must sit in this courtroom restrained," she said, "then let my restraint be a mirror. Let America see what happens. When a black woman demands rights for the voiceless," the judge called for a recess, not to rest, but to recover from the political earthquake shaking his courtroom. In recess, a reporter asked her if she regretted getting arrested. Jasmine simply replied, "Regret is for silence. I spoke." That line echoed across newsrooms, podcasts, and protest signs nationwide. The next day, her speech was played on national television in its entirety. Law students began analyzing it for its legal precision. Political scientists dissected its rhetorical power. Crockett had turned a 5-minute arrest into a full-scale movement, and it wasn't stopping. Returning to court, Jasmine presented a folder to the judge. "These are affidavits and medical records from over 40 incarcerated women," she said. "Each one denied adequate care. Each one ignored. I was arrested for refusing to let their stories remain buried under bureaucracy." The folder flipping through silently. The courtroom had never felt so tense, yet so alive. Jasmine had not just brought receipts, she brought undeniable reality. The prosecution tried to shift the focus, claiming Jasmine disrupted official procedures. Her response? Procedures being followed were built to ignore suffering. "If disruption is what it takes to rewrite those procedures, then I proudly disrupted." I disrupted silence. I disrupted injustice. I disrupted the lie that it's fine if we just follow the rules. The audience, composed of press, citizens, and court observers, stood still. No one blinked. Everyone listened. Then came the unexpected. A former prison nurse stood up in the back and said, "She's telling the truth. I was fired for reporting neglect." The bailiffs moved to remove her, but the judge raised a hand. "Let her speak," he said. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just making a legal point. She had inspired others to risk everything to do the same. The courtroom was no longer a chamber of judgment. It had become a forum for justice. In the days that followed, Jasmine's arrest made headlines worldwide. Unhuman rights observers issued statements of concern. Civil rights organizations filed demands for investigation into the prisons in question. Congressional colleagues began drafting bipartisan bills based on her collected evidence. What began with cuffs had become a campaign, and Jasmine, ever grounded, reminded her supporters, "I'm not the first to be arrested for justice, and I won't be the last. But I'll make damn sure I'm not ignored." Even those who once opposed her policies began reevaluating their positions. One moderate senator said in an interview, "You can disagree with her methods, but not her heart or her facts."
Oh.
Crockett didn't gloat. Instead, she sent letters to every incarcerated woman who contributed to her evidence file, thanking them for their courage. "Yeah, truth got me through those doors," she wrote. "Now, I'll use every door I have access to make your truth law." Talk shows invited her for interviews, which she declined most. "I didn't do it for airtime," she said. "I did it because policy moves slower than injustice, and sometimes it needs a shove." Instead of media rounds, she convened a task force. Lawyers, doctors, prison reformers, and survivors joined her to draft one of the most aggressive accountability bills ever introduced in Congress. It was named the Women's Dignity Act, and it bore the names of every letter she'd read in court. Meanwhile, the judge in her case dismissed all charges. The court finds that the defendant acted not with malice, but with moral conviction backed by evidence, he said. Jasmine didn't smile. She simply nodded. Her victory wasn't about clearing her name. It was about making sure the names in those letters could no longer be ignored. The judge's dismissal became a turning point in national conversations about protest, privilege, and who gets punished for telling the truth. Outside the courthouse, thousands gathered as she exited. No raised fists, no chants, just quiet respect. Jasmine spoke briefly. "If they cuff one voice, we raise 1,000 more. That's how systems fall under the weight of truth." It was poetic, but also strategic. She knew the cameras were on. She knew that words last longer when they come from pain with purpose. And once again, she delivered exactly what the moment needed. Soon, students began quoting her in debate tournaments. Professors assigned her courtroom speech and ethics classes. Journalists wrote op-eds titled, "When the System Met Its Match," and "From Cuffs to Congress, the Jasmine Crockett Moment." But Jasmine didn't slow down. "Virality fades," she told her staff. "Legislation doesn't. Let's get it passed." Her team worked around the clock, and within 2 months, had more co-sponsors than anyone predicted. The prison contractors named in her speech went under federal review. Whistleblowers came forward. DOJ investigations began. Jasmine was called to testify in a televised congressional hearing. There, she repeated the same line. "Silencing people who speak truth is how injustice survives, but not on my watch." Applause broke out not from the audience, but from fellow lawmakers. That moment marked her transition from rising star to undeniable force. Her impact went global. Human rights conferences invited her to speak. International activists cited her arrest as an example of civic courage. She responded with humility. "This isn't about heroism, it's about humanity, and that belongs to all of us." She refused to be treated like a celebrity. She insisted on being treated like what she truly was, a servant of justice. By the year's end, the Women's Dignity Act passed its first major committee. Jasmine stood at the podium, flanked by survivors and allies. She didn't gloat. didn't grandstand. She simply said, "This is their win." I just wore the cuffs for them. When asked by a reporter what she learned from her arrest, she replied that sometimes the system needs to see what it looks like to be challenged by someone it can't scare. So yes, they handcuffed Jasmine Crockett. But they didn't break her. They didn't silence her. Instead, they unlocked something much bigger, a nationwide reckoning. 5 minutes of forced restraint sparked a movement of unleashed truth. In the end, it wasn't the system that stood tall, it was Jasmine. Walking free, leading thousands, and rewriting the very rules that tried to hold her back.